Welcome to the very first episode of this English listening practice podcast. I'm really glad you decided to join me today, because you've already taken the first step toward improving one of the most important skills in language learning, your listening ability. Listening is more than just hearing words. It's about understanding meaning, catching details, and recognizing how native speakers connect sounds together. Many learners believe that simply watching movies or TV shows will automatically make them better listeners. While those activities can help, the real progress comes when you listen with a purpose, when you focus, notice patterns, and pay attention to the small details in what you hear. In this first episode, we're going to work on training your ear to recognize small but important differences in English sounds. These differences can change the meaning of a word completely. For example, ship and sheep, one is a boat, the other is an animal. Or bit and beat, one means a small piece, the other is what your heart does. Here's how the episode will go. First, you'll hear a short conversation at natural speed. Don't worry if you don't understand everything at first, that's normal. After listening, I'll ask you some questions to check how much you understood. Then we'll slow it down, repeat it, and go through the most useful words and expressions. Finally, you'll hear the conversation again at normal speed so you can compare your understanding. By the end of this session, you'll already be improving your ability to hear English more clearly and confidently. Alright, let's get started. Listening Round 1. Last weekend I took a long trip to a small coastal town I had heard about many times but never visited. I arrived early in the morning when the sky was changing from dark blue to pale gold. The air smelled faintly of salt and seaweed, and there was a quiet energy in the harbor that felt different from the city. Fishermen were busy preparing their boats, talking and checking nets, while early walkers carried steaming cups and nodded hello. A large ship sat at the pier, its hull worn by years on the water, and it creaked softly as it adjusted with the tide. I walked slowly along the waterfront watching sunlight hit the surface and make tiny diamonds on the waves. A few small boats moved away toward the open sea and seagulls circled above, dipping now and then to catch fish. I paused to look at the ship more closely. Its name was painted in chipped letters along the side, and crew members climbed the rigging and tested ropes. Being near that vessel at dawn made the harbor feel alive in a way that is hard to describe unless you have stood there and listened. After some time I left the pier and wandered through narrow streets. The houses were low and close together, with colorful doors and window boxes filled with flowers. Shops displayed hand-written signs and the scent of the bakeries poured onto the pavement. I stepped into one of those bakeries and bought a warm roll filled with jam and a small flaky pastry. I sat on a bench outside and watched people begin their day. An elderly woman swept her doorstep carefully, a young man tied his child into a stroller, and a teenager carried a bag of fresh fish. Everything moved at its own calm pace, and I felt like a visitor observing a quiet ceremony. Curiosity led me up a narrow lane toward a path that climbed gently along the headland. The trail was covered in small stones and lined with grasses that bent and whispered in the breeze. As I climbed, the town grew smaller behind me and the view opened wide. In a nearby field a few sheep grazed calmly, their white shapes visible against the green. A shepherd walked among them with a slow, patient step and a long wooden staff. The combined sound of wind, distant waves, and occasional bird calls made a steady soundtrack for the walk. At the top of the hill I found a low stone wall and sat down to rest. My feet felt tired but content from the climb. From that point I could see the coastline stretch in a broad curve, and the sea looked deep and endless. Small boats moved across the water like slow, deliberate dots, and sunlight flashed on the waves in bright lines that reached toward the horizon. The sky was mostly clear with occasional small clouds passing, and each time a cloud moved over the water it changed the light for a moment. I stayed there for a long time simply watching and breathing, letting the quiet sink in. As the day moved on I walked back down into town and found a small cafe for lunch. The menu was modest but comforting, and I ordered a bowl of soup and a plate of roasted vegetables. To finish, I had a slice of lemon cake that was light and slightly tart. While I ate, I listened to the conversations around me. People spoke quickly at times and laughed easily, and the clink of cutlery and soft music from the radio filled the air. The patterns of speech sounded familiar but different in rhythm from what I hear at home, and that made me notice small changes in pronunciation and tone. Later, I visited a small museum by the harbor that told the history of the town. Old black and white photographs showed fewer boats in the past and a much busier market years ago. Stories on the wall described families who mended nets together, who sold fish and bread, and who rebuilt houses after storms. A curator with kind eyes spoke to me briefly about a few local stories, each one simple and human and full of care. Those stories added depth to the place, as if the landscape held memories not immediately visible. Before leaving, I walked to the lighthouse at the edge of the rocks and sat on a bench nearby. The steady, slow pulse of the light and the regular sound of the waves felt comforting. I watched children play by the shore, people walk dogs, and an older man quietly fishing from a small jetty. Later, carrying a small bag of pastries from the bakery, I began the journey home. On the train, I replayed parts of the day in my mind, the smell of fresh bread, the climb up the hill, the museum stories, and the slow rhythm of the harbor. I will certainly go back soon again. Listening Round 2. It was a quiet autumn morning when Emma received an unexpected letter in the post. She lived in a small village on the edge of the countryside, where the days were slow, and the seasons painted the world in different colors. The envelope was cream-colored, with her name written in elegant handwriting she didn't recognize. There was no return address, only a faint scent of lavender clinging to the paper. Curious, she opened it slowly, careful not to tear the neat writing inside. The letter began with a greeting that felt strangely warm, as though the sender knew her well. It spoke of a meeting arranged for the following week, at a cafe in the nearby town. There were no details about the reason, only a time and place. The writer signed off with just one letter, A. Emma sat by the kitchen window, reading the message again and again, wondering who could have sent it. Over the next few days, she found herself thinking about the letter constantly. She considered the possibility of it being from an old friend, but she couldn't recall anyone whose name began with A, who would send her such a note. She thought about ignoring it altogether, but her curiosity was stronger than her hesitation. On the morning of the meeting, she dressed in a simple blue coat, wrapped a scarf around her neck, and caught the bus into town. The cafe was small but welcoming, with the smell of freshly ground coffee filling the air. A few customers sat by the window, chatting softly. Emma chose a seat near the back, where she could see the door clearly. Minutes passed, and she watched each person who entered, wondering if they might be A. Then, the bell above the door rang, and a tall man in his 30s walked in. He wore a dark coat and carried a leather-bound notebook. His eyes scanned the room before landing on Emma. "Emma?" he asked with a gentle smile. She nodded cautiously. He sat down opposite her and introduced himself as Adam, a historian who had recently moved to the village. He explained that he had come across an old diary in the attic of the cottage he had rented, and inside, he found her name written several times. The diary belonged to a woman named Margaret, who had lived in the same village decades earlier. Adam believed that Margaret might have been related to Emma in some way, and he wanted to know if she could help him uncover the story. Intrigued, Emma agreed to see the diary. As Adam carefully placed it on the table, she noticed the cover was worn, the pages yellowed with time. Inside, the handwriting was neat but slightly faded. The entries spoke of daily life, small joys, and, eventually, a series of strange events involving mysterious visitors to the village. One particular entry caught Emma's eye. It mentioned a hidden letter meant to be delivered when the time was right. She wondered if the lavender-scented letter she had received was connected. Adam leaned forward, clearly thinking the same thing. The cafe seemed to fade into the background as they pored over the diary, piecing together fragments of a story long forgotten. By the time they looked up, the afternoon light was fading, and a thin mist had begun to cover the streets outside. They agreed to meet again, certain that this was only the beginning of their search. As Emma stepped back into the cool air, she couldn't shake the feeling that the past was reaching out to her, pulling her toward secrets she had yet to uncover. Listening Round 3. It was a cold February morning in the small coastal town of Whitford. The streets were still wet from the heavy rain the night before, and the sky was painted with shades of grey. Martha, the owner of a small bakery on the corner of Harbour Street, was up before dawn as usual. She unlocked the shop's front door, flipped the sign to open, and turned on the warm lights inside. The smell of freshly baked bread and cinnamon rolls filled the air. Martha loved mornings like this. The quiet streets, the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore, and the comforting rhythm of preparing the day's pastries made her feel at peace. But this morning was different. As she was arranging croissants on a tray, she noticed a small, neatly folded letter placed on the counter. She was certain it hadn't been there when she locked up the night before. Curious, she picked it up. The envelope was cream-colored, with her name written in beautiful cursive handwriting. There was no stamp, no sender's name, just Martha, on the front. She opened it slowly. Inside was a short message. Meet me at the lighthouse at sunset. I have something important to tell you. A friend. Martha's heart skipped a beat. Who could this be? She hadn't received a mysterious note like this since she was a teenager. At first, she considered ignoring it. After all, it could be a prank. But there was something about the handwriting, something familiar. The rest of her morning passed in a blur. Customers came and went, buying their loaves of bread and coffee, but her mind kept drifting back to the letter. She even burned a batch of muffins because she was lost in thought. By the time the afternoon rolled around, the rain clouds had cleared, and the winter sun was shining low in the sky. Martha closed the bakery an hour earlier than usual. She wrapped herself in her thick scarf, put the letter in her coat pocket, and began walking toward the lighthouse. The wind from the sea was cold, but her heart was racing with warmth and curiosity. When she reached the old lighthouse, the golden light of sunset bathed the stone walls. She looked around, half expecting no one to be there. But then, she saw a figure standing near the railing. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dark coat. He turned, and Martha gasped. It was Daniel, her childhood friend who had moved away more than 20 years ago. Daniel smiled warmly and said, "I'm sorry it took me so long to come back." And that wraps up today's listening practice. You've just trained your ears with 3 different stories, each designed to help you catch details, follow a sequence, and expand your vocabulary. Remember, the more you listen, the faster your brain connects sounds to meaning. So replay these stories as often as you like, and challenge yourself to catch even more details each time. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow so you never miss a new practice session. And if you want to level up your listening even faster, share this with a friend so you can both train together. Until next time, keep listening, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next episode.